This is what I'm looking for, but you don't have that to bring to the table. And this energy that it sounds like, I need this, I want it, right? Just that kind of needy energy, huge red flags. How do you navigate those issues later on when they crop up?
See, I just hate to sound like a broken record. At this point, it's not really tactical business stuff, because ultimately that's one of the biggest challenges, not get like tied up or wrapped up on like emotional rabbit holes or what if this or what if that. There's a lot of founders out there that could have kept going.
Hey everyone, Jazz Binning here, co-host of Growth Marketing Camp. Welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm joined by Jorge Soto, co-founder of AssetMule. He's a veteran entrepreneur with a deep background in marketing, product management, sales. He also is a fellow host. So I'm excited to be talking to you.
Well, thank you so much. Really
for sure.
appreciate it.
I always love having conversations with podcast hosts. So in your podcast is the GTM Pack Show and Startup Unedited Podcast. So let's dive in. So first off, Jorge, welcome. Why don't you tell me where you're calling from? Where are you based?
Yeah, so I am currently in Miami, Florida, after spending many, many years in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then before that, spent a couple years in New York and just kind of moved around quite a bit after college.
Oh, man. And where did you go to college? Where were you actually? Yeah. Where did you start your career?
Yeah, interesting enough, I started my career in the most unlikely place. It was Northern Florida, the capital of Florida, Tallahassee. I went to Florida State University for the folks out there who are familiar with like football and stuff, we were pretty good in the, I guess we're still decent, give or take, but we used to be really good in the 90s, 80s and stuff when it was pretty popular to have that rivalry in college football between Florida State and Miami and all that. There was a lot of shenanigans going on there.
Yep.
However, went to school there, started my career there, my entrepreneurial career. I always tell the story how I met a venture capitalist in the military tech space, which was completely foreign to me, especially because I was from Miami that didn't have any tech. I wasn't in like Boston or Cambridge or Stanford, Silicon Valley or whatnot. So that whole concept of like building companies and startups and technology in general was super foreign. So I met this VC and started working on a project with him and a family member of his. And 20 something years later, I'm still doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I saw your LinkedIn made me laugh because when I was kind of doing my usual creep people's LinkedIn, you had a comment there basically that you've been doing this like almost like therapy for 23 years and you're experiencing like I'm sure all of the wonders but also like the PTSD from it, you're like addicted to it. So I'm like, okay, this is gonna be fun. I know you're now at AssetMule, so before we get into your experience and how you kind of got to where you are, why don't you tell me a little bit about AssetMule? What do you guys do and for whom? Who's your target audience?
Yeah, so AssetMule is a tool that allows product marketers and sales teams to be able to create personalized, what we call interactive sales assets, right? So one way to think about these is a replacement for your PDF, right? Now, and listen, I love PDFs. I still use them. But within the context of sales and particularly the collaboration between marketing and sales teams, particularly even deeper product marketing or those marketers tasked with supporting sales with sales enablement, it's just not a really great option. And especially these days where you really want something that's interactive, that's constantly giving buying signals out. We work in remote environments for the most part these days. There's hybrid environments too, but even when we are on site, we are on Slack, we're on Microsoft Teams, or whatever chat system internally that you use. And so the ability to actually send collateral to your prospects that is interactive, that gives you those buying signals, as I mentioned, that is easy to share internally via these internal tools, and then ultimately creates a better buying experience that's more relevant to the buyer is our goal. But of course, on the other side, as a sales and marketing team, you want to know what's working. You want to know how to prioritize what you're creating as a marketing team for sales and what you're using as a sales team. So at a high level, that's what we're doing. You asked about who's it for. It's for B2B right now. Our sweet spot is B2B software companies
Hmm.
entering through product marketing or those sales enablement focused marketers, and then the output of those templates that these marketers put together are used by sales.
Got it. Got it. So, I mean, the way you've described it, it sounds like then you guys, AssetMule, would be servicing many different personas, right? So the salesperson who's sending out proposals, maybe the marketing team, so they can take a lot of the feedback and just use the signals to determine, hey, what's working, what's resonating, what's not. Probably, I'm thinking like sales or marketing, whoever owns the space. Who's making the buying decision? Is that kind of the case? Multiple personas are, involved in purchasing, and then actually using, the day-to-day admin and then, the strategy and all of that. So is that kind of the case here?
Yeah, fortunately and unfortunately. And I say
Yeah.
that because on one hand, you have the function of
Mhm.
supporting sales that could happen across different personas or stakeholders within an organization. That might be your sales manager in some organizations, right? It may be sales enablement, it may be product marketing. So that's why it's unfortunate, because it's like, kind of different and it varies. Although we've been able to identify some sweet spots here, certainly early on in the existence of our business. But fortunately, because it's something that is not new,
Yeah.
right? It's the idea of marketing and sales having to work together around sales collateral, sales assets is as old as it can be.
Yeah.
And so that really helps us. We're just trying to like create more efficiencies, create better, more intelligent ways of doing these things. But ultimately, it's about creating a buyer experience, right? Like we're all about this like buyer enablement movement right now, which you've seen different types of technologies kind of contribute to throughout the years. Experiences like drift.com,
Yeah.
right? Not the first chat tool ever, right? There's been plenty before that, Live Person, there's a plethora of other ones, but like just these experiences that are more relevant, personalized, and make it easier for the buyer to buy. That's kind of at the forefront. But of course, as I mentioned before, you have a go-to-market team behind
Yep.
the vendor that needs to be aligned and work efficiently.
Yeah, it's interesting, like a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, because I see a lot of alignment. I'm also head of marketing at a company that services multiple personas, and it's also in many ways a sales and marketing tool because at Opensense we do email signatures and so email signature marketing. So you can basically target the signature campaigns depending on persona or whatever. So the sales team who's trying to maybe close a deal, same time you're also trying to sell it to marketers. So I ask these questions because it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to try to, especially to try to understand how can I package this in a way that makes sense, and then to kind of deconstruct it. What you just mentioned at the very end, the most important thing is the buyer experience. And so when you've got a startup or a company or a tool or a platform that services multiple people, it's just how can we just cut out all the noise, really simplify it so we don't risk confusing, right, the buyers at the end of the day. And how do you come up with a good go-to-market strategy that simplifies it and shows the value straight off the bat versus just, again, being confused. So I know you guys, why don't you share a little bit about, I know you co-founded AssetMule. You've had a lot of experience before. How long has AssetMule been around? How has your vision and kind of for AssetMule shifted since, inception of this company?
Yeah. So we've been around for a little over a year now. I guess time's flying. So, there was the moment where my co-founders and I sat down and we were like, let's do a company. For me, I was like, oh my God, do I want to attempt another company? Um, but I should say that it's not every day that you find great co-founders.
Mhm.
In fact, I would argue that that's one of the most challenging aspects of starting a company. Everything's challenging, but if you don't have a great co-founding team that not only works hard and works independently, like if you have one or two co-founders that you have to babysit, it's very, very difficult to actually do that, long term. If you have a co-founder or two, I'm using the numbers that we're three and experiences I've had, but you've had co-founding teams that have ranged in number of stakeholders. But if you have also a co-founder or so that is, let's just say, doesn't have the experience or knowledge that you have in terms of maturity and things like that, it's very, very difficult. So I was sitting there about a little over a year and I guess a half ago or so at this point, and I'd known Justin for years, right? We met when I was still back in the Bay Area, and Dane was a close friend of his. And although I had never met him, when we met, I was like, all right, this individual knows their stuff. They had seen the movie. You can kind of see on paper, right? Like if you look at their LinkedIn and see what they've done, you're like, all right, I got a good sense for what they could potentially know. Mm-hmm. But then to actually see that match reality, plus with a level of maturity and vision for the type of company that you want to build, plus the lifestyle that you want to have, right? Those things I was like, boy, plus the technical stuff, right? Like the actual technical skill sets. I was like, we got to do this thing. So, in terms of the inspiration, we sat down and we started to think about some of the pains that we had experienced in our careers, and we honed down to this initial concept, which was Canva for sales enablement. Mm-hmm. We're like, we just need something really easy to put together, right? Stuff without design dependencies and these sort of things. And in terms of like how it's evolved, the vision, interesting enough, we've done hundreds and continue to do. We're going to do another several hundred customer interviews or market research, user interviews, et cetera, over the last whatever it is, 15 months or whatnot. And our vision really has not changed at a high level, although we have gone back and forth, which I think is somewhat normal based on, the space we're in, certainly. So we've gone back and forth between, is it a product marketing tool or is it a sales tool? Because it's like, to what we were discussing earlier, it's used by both. Who's the buyer, our pricing, all these things that we've gone back and forth around many, many, many times. But interesting enough, at the end of the day, after, chewing on it again and again, and we sort of go through this cycle every couple of weeks where we, challenge our thesis, and then we generally end up coming back to the same place that we started off, same mission. So it's interesting, I'm not suggesting that that's going to be the case moving forward, but it does feel good that we do end up, sort of settling at the same place. And we feel like instinctually, the decisions that we make have been largely pretty efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys are kind of staying close to, what you originally, the inception of AssetMule, because you're regularly, like I said, it sounds like you're doing interviews. You guys are checking in on each other. You touched on a bunch of things that I actually want to, I'd like to dig in a little bit deeper, especially on like the founder side, because I think that's super interesting. And, you mentioned before you've had like almost 2 decades of experience, and again, I'm a massive creep. So I was looking at your LinkedIn. You've got a lot of advisor roles. You've been working at many different companies. You've started many. What do you look for? And again, and I think this is especially like any founder led, especially if the founders are still very involved in the company. What do you look for in kind of making a decision that, hey, this is these are the qualities that I think are like green flags, the top 3 green flags in working with other founders and just making a decision to just jump in with them? And what are the top 3 red flags? And you had touched on sometimes if someone's, doesn't have the experience, that could also potentially cause a lot of friction, right? To have to handhold someone. How do you navigate those issues later on when they crop up that, hey, to just put aside politics for the sake of and the growth of the company?
Yeah. I wish I had a like bulletproof answer because, I think this is partially the challenge of life. Like these types of things happen in our families, in our relationships, in our communities. So I think it's inevitable that you're going to have some conflict at some point, whether it's real conflict, which is actually a much bigger question of what conflict really is. Is conflict something that is a energy or resistance or an agitation inside of you that you are then projecting out, has nothing to do with the other person? Or is conflict literally like, we're fighting two humans, right, over this silly topic, whatever that is. That's more of a philosophical
Mhm.
thought exercise. However, I'll start off with the first part of your question, like those things that I look for are things that I try to be. Now, am I perfect? Absolutely not. But I do try to, and my intention is to be this way every day. The
Mhm.
first thing, and I do the work all the time. Sometimes I'm better. Sometimes I'm not so good. Like today, I was just before this meeting, I was dropping off my son at tutoring,
Mhm.
and I'm running, between meetings and stuff. I didn't want to be late here, obviously. Um, but I found myself like about to start to unravel these complaining and, and all this stuff going on in my head. And some days I'm really able to be in those situations and identify very quickly and not let it actually mess up the
Yep.
rest of my day.
Mhm.
And then other days I'm like, um, I just let it go, and and then it messes up the rest of my day. Luckily, I was able to grab it and be like, oh, there goes that pattern.
Yep. Yep.
So what I'm pointing out is actually like an emotional intelligence that I think is really important. And some would call this type of stuff like mindfulness or whatever, understanding yourself and your patterns and your behaviors. So that's how I approach
Mhm.
most relationships, or all of them. Again, some I'm better than at others, but I try to identify these things within the co-founder dynamic, and that's, once you sound like you understand the space, and I've looked at your background, and you're like, okay, this person seems on paper,
Mhm.
then it's really very much about what I just alluded to, like that emotional intelligence in
Yep.
their communication. Are they getting on and just being, reactive right away?
Yep.
Can you
Yep.
have, even in the discussion around like ideas, right? Like we, we set, we actually wrote down a couple potential pains that we wanted to solve that ended up being all related anyways, at the end of the day. But like in that discussion, how are we able to, collaborate in that discussion right there where we're dating? It's kind of like, you're dating, you really are, right? You're at a dinner table and some topic comes up. How are you able to actually have a pleasant conversation, even if you don't necessarily have the same ideas and so on?
Yes.
So, again, emotional intelligence, that's the biggest thing, and continuing to do that. And I say that now because I haven't always been like that. And here's what I mean. And I'll give two analogies. The first one is I in the past was so like I need to do a company. I needed to do a company, and I would be out there, and I'm non-technical, right? I don't write code, and I
Mhm.
happen to become an entrepreneur within the software industry, right? So I went out there trying to look for co-founders and would be begging engineers. Like I had no clue if they were emotionally intelligent or anything, but I was like begging them, oh, I need I need you kind of thing. So it was a very needy energy. And
Mhm.
those things just never worked out. Even if we did end up working on something or whatever, it really unraveled pretty quickly. It wasn't a good dynamic
Yep.
because it was imbalanced. to begin with. So I should say I haven't always been that way. And I guess, that message that I kind of is like 50% joking on my LinkedIn is actually quite true
Yeah.
in that, you know, sometimes your identities, not sometimes, I would argue that most of us, there's maybe some like Yoda masters out there
Yeah.
who are as entrepreneurs detached from their startup or their identity is not super detached or attached to their startup. For most of us, the product, the startup, the experience we're so tied to. So, being able to over the years detach myself more and more while still balancing the passion and caring and grit that is required to do a company and long-term resilience is quite interesting, because I think a lot of the time we'll tap into the identity and the ego and the wanting to do something like a company to prove something to somebody or ourselves, or prove that we're worthy or whatever, all these things that are underneath a lot of our behaviors. So that's just a long-winded way of saying, like, I haven't always been like that. That's who I try to be now, and I feel somewhat proud of myself that I've been able to accomplish that state of being more than certainly I used to be. So again, emotional intelligence. The other story I wanted to say was just like, even if you look at life in general, there was a time where I remember I was in my late 30s and I was out in the Bay Area doing startups and all that. And everybody back home in my hometown, my cousins, they were all getting married, having kids and all this stuff. And I had this FOMO. I was like, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to become the next Steve Jobs or whatever, right? That because that was kind of my thing for a long time. And on some days I get caught in down that rabbit hole still. But so I had this approach where I was like, I gotta go and get married and like do all these things and stuff. And and even before that, there was an imbalanced energy towards that my personal life.
Mhm.
And it was only when I reached the point where I was done, where I was just like, you know what? Um, I I I need to continue to work on myself and be happy on my own and not go down these FOMO rabbit holes of what everyone else is doing. Oh, it was only then did I meet my current partner, who is the love of my life, and she's incredible and so on. Um and it's just a completely different animal. And uh I feel like it's a very similar thing to the relationship I have, or the story that I have with my co-founders now, where like I wasn't, out there trying to start a company just to prove something to somebody. I didn't want to start a company,
Mhm.
this time. I was like, no, no, no. And it was like by divine intervention that, Dane and Justin came back into my life. Justin and Dane came into my life for the first time, and we've been at it and we're having fun. So even when we're sitting there trying to figure out something very difficult, which
Mhm.
is most of the startup experience, because we have so much respect and admiration for each other, um, and each other's emotional intelligence, it's a different experience, and it's one of those things where it causes you to just be appreciative.
Mhm.
I know
Yeah.
that's a bit of a tangent there, but I
I
thought
mean,
that was really important.
yeah, no, I saw again, you touched on a few things that I'm like, okay, I love to hear it, and things that I wouldn't even think of, but you don't actually realize how important it is. Few things that you had mentioned earlier, in the beginning of the question, to seek the qualities you seek in your founders and the people that you're going to be working with, right? This partnership are the ones that you want to embody. I love that, right? That's again, we can all come in, whether it's in a relationship or if you're starting a company with a few friends or people that you're just, trying to connect with, to go in and say, this is what I'm looking for, but you don't have that to bring to the table. Huge red flag. So I love that you mentioned that. I also like the similarities, between both your personal experience and finding your in your relationship, and then the what you guys are doing at AssetMule, and your relationship with your team. and this energy that it sounds like of just intention and detachment from I need this, I want it, right? Just that kind of needy energy and almost this desperation to just let it go, do good work, focus on checking yourself constantly, whether it's you catching that thought while you're driving with your son, and just being mindful that, hey, I'm having these thoughts. Let's observe it and let's kind of let it go, versus also the conversations that you're having in the very beginning where it's like, again, the desperation, hey, there's a huge void. I need you to come and fill that void. I need a technical person to do that, versus you showing up in 100% as yourself with your strengths, the stuff that you're continue to work on, whether it's your relationship or founders. I just love all of that because, again, it's the stuff that until you pay attention to it in your own personal life and your personal experiences, and you do like a post-mortem and you look back and it's like, wow, if I've desperately wanted something, and again, it's kind of comes from a space of I don't have it and I need it. It's the success and even just your mental health and that kind of to start a relationship like that is so much worse versus coming in, focusing on yourself, not comparing yourself and your journey to your peers, to other startups, because every single person has a very unique experience. So I loved how you touched on all of that. I think all of that, just bigger picture of the right way to actually approach life and career. I love that.
Well, I'm glad that resonates. I like to say that the startup experience is a training ground for a lot of things in life and vice versa, right?
Yeah. Based off of kind of your past experiences coming into now AssetMule, how do you think that your experiences, whether it's starting, I'm sure you've probably failed many, right? And I'm sure, if again, you've had a lot of failures, a lot of successes under your belt. What are the things that you think have truly helped you be where you are at today and helped you continue to be successful based off of your past experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Yeah, even though I don't remember sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
being a heart-centered, emotional, like honest, uh, caring person, even if it hurts you sometimes, has been the best thing that I've ever done. And I don't know that I could have done it any other way.
Mm-hmm.
Just given who I am, how I've been raised. Uh, Shout out to my parents. That that I think, like, leading with my heart, even though I've sat there many times and have gone, damn man, maybe I should be a jerk. I know there's like, this perception that like the tough people, the jerks are the ones who are successful and all this stuff. But I just, as much as I've gone through moments maybe where I was agitated or something like that, it wasn't authentic. It wasn't like, that wasn't my honest, happy place, state of being. So I think that that's probably one of the best, the things that has impacted my career in the most profound way. And why I say that is because I hear it all the time. You know, they're like, my co-founders have told me this plenty of times, but I've heard this many times. And, I've been, as you alluded to, doing this for a couple years now. And it's really makes me feel really good actually to go back and hear those things and be like, man, you're a good person. That's the best thing that I could hear.
Mm-hmm.
So I ask myself sometimes, is it like, do I want to be liked? Do I want to be respected? Do I want to be feared? Or do I want to be loved? Do I want people to say, oh, what do I want people to say?
Mm-hmm.
And as many times as I get insecure or feel that level of insecurity, or that I go down through those, those loops that we go through sometimes, and I'm like, oh, I want to be respected. Oh, I'm not respect, whatever it is. I don't really care about that. At the end of the day, I actually don't care about that. Like, I do care that I impacted the world in a kind way, and so that somebody thought that I was kind, right, and nice and all that. That actually means the most to me. And so I would say that.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say, just like, just being having received so much help and collaboration from others out there who showed, who showed their hearts too, right? I do think that like you have to couple that with like work ethic um and grit and
Yep.
determination. So those two, I think, are like that's an ideal state of being for me. Is like I was able to be loving, and no matter how people treated
Mhm.
me or my perception of their treatment, while working hard and trying to be as selfless as possible, given my selfishness traits at times.
Yep.
That's who I'd want to be, and that's again, like that pursuit of that, I think has been super beneficial.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not perfect, but that's my intention.
Yeah, no, I love that. And again, I think one of the things you just touch on, just trying to be like authentic in everything that you do. And based off of you and my experience, I'm the kind of person where I think if I had to choose all of those, would I rather be respected? Would I rather be feared? Right? I don't think I want to be feared. I want to be loved.
Yeah.
But having that, I remember even for myself when I came into even the leadership role at the company that I'm at, to go from an IC to now I'm managing a team. I started off initially thinking I want to be the best. All the trauma that my past managers had given me, and I remember I've also worked in a lot of toxic companies in the past, and so I kind of had all of those experiences, and I thought if I'm ever in a position where I've got more control, I'm going to make sure the environment is like perfect, exactly how I wish that it was when I started off my career. And so the problem with that, which I noticed, especially the biggest struggle that I had a couple of years ago, it was realizing that if I want to truly be like, stay and, be authentic and truly what I feel, right? Bring in my realist self, I'm going to end up being respected at times, feared at times, right? Hated, I'm sure at times. And there was the struggle that I experienced in the very beginning where I'm like, no, I just want them to like me. I want them to know this, like my intention matters. The intention, right? That I'm bringing into this, it's positive, but sometimes not a lot of people from the outside are going to see that. And so it's like, again, as long as I am understanding and aware of the energy that I'm bringing in and what my goals are, and as long as they're not self-serving, then you know what? I can't control what the outside world is going to feel with my actions. If I know my actions are aligned and they are with the best of intentions, whether it's to grow my team, to serve my company, to service my customers, myself, my family. And so I think again, like exactly what you mentioned, that's an area that you feel that you want to be loved. And then it's the issue of well, I can do what I can kind of focus on what only I can control. I can't really manage other people. So it's
Yeah.
super, super interesting, like the stuff that you just mentioned. I kind of see a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, don't we all want to be loved?
Mhm.
Even when we have, if you ever think about it, sit in reflection and think about the times where you behaved in ways that were categorized as angry
Yeah.
or mean or whatever. It's like, what's underneath that, right? Like,
Mhm.
isn't it that, maybe our fear of not being accepted or our fear of um of showing our vulnerability supersedes our action
Mhm.
of being vulnerable, and so in a way to protect ourselves at some emotional, philosophical, whatever level, we behave in a different way. It's interesting. It's a very, very interesting thing to think about. And this idea of emotional intelligence,
Yep.
and applying this to all aspects of our life, but of course we're talking business here.
Mhm.
Being able to do that at a really high level, putting in the work, keeping yourself in check, especially as a leader,
Mhm.
I think is one of the greatest gifts you can give to yourself and others around you. Not easy, right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
we are human. And I think part of this human experience is experiencing the full gamut of emotions and energy and etc.
Hmm.
But I think to keep this stuff in mind is really critical. I think like also I was on a podcast a couple of days ago, and we were talking about American business culture and this idea that in the 80s and 90s, at least I remember watching a lot of those Wall Street type movies. It was like,
Yeah.
oh, they were just drinking whiskey and like being rude and
Yeah. Yeah.
and whatever, and that was it. That was like, you're supposed to be this, like, let's just make money at all costs kind of thing. And I don't know that anybody, like, if you've ever spoken to elderly folks, retirees, people who have been successful, I don't think anybody ever, I've never heard it where they're like, God, I really wish that I would have been more mean or been more aggressive or been more, type A or whatever. It's always these other very philosophical, sort of heart-centered things. I'll give you a quick note. My buddy Noah Kagan, he owns this company called AppSumo, and
Hmm.
he was like former Facebook, early Facebook. He's got a cool story. Check him out. He's like pretty big on YouTube now, and he did this um, series where he goes and like asks rich people how they got to their point, to
Yep.
that
Yep.
period in their life, et cetera. You've seen those probably out there. So he does that kind of stuff. And he went and spoke to a bunch of billionaires who have, again, made billions of bucks, arguably successful. And the common theme, and I literally was shedding a tear here because I really connected with this concept. And it was the common theme from all these billionaires was and it was interesting. I'm thinking about now is just kind of like the profile of individual, but they said that the best thing that they'd ever been called
Hmm.
was mom or dad. It wasn't boss, it wasn't CEO, it wasn't chairman, it wasn't billionaire, it wasn't this, it was that. And so it's just interesting, right? Like the things that really matter at the end of the day, nothing that we've talked about here is new. I think we've all been exposed to this kind of wisdom. How do we apply it on a consistent basis? How do we navigate when things don't go that way? Forgive ourselves, forgive others.
Hmm.
There's a great, Steve Jobs used to read the autobiography of a yogi by Yogananda.
Hmm.
And for the folks out there who are not familiar, Yogananda, I can't pronounce the first part of his name. So,
Yeah.
but it's a thing, right? Like Steve Jobs has talked a lot about it, how he would read the book like once a year. And so, not to go down some sort of like religious, dogmatic, you know, set of thoughts. So I'll kind of generalize it, but like one of the things that the author talks about is like this idea that no matter what people are saying to you, no matter how they're treating you or your perception of that, the ability to actually love them anyways, forgive them anyways, turn the
Hmm.
cheek. We've heard
Yep.
that concept,
Hmm.
you know, is so powerful. And I was sitting there actually I read the book a couple months or maybe it was a year ago or something like that, whatever. I was revisiting some of the concepts last night, interesting enough. And it was like, yes, I gosh, that's who I want to be, right? I don't want to be the, Wall Street, stereotypical jerk making money, but treats everyone and burns down everyone around them
Yep. Yep.
in pursuit of that. I want to be the person that can be loving. I've said that a couple of times on this conversation, but or this episode, but like it just, I don't know. That's, that's my pursuit.
Hmm. And it's a noble one for sure. And it probably, again, I'm sure has changed and it's shifted over the years. I'm sure what you're looking for now and kind of how you envision your life today. Right. Also, you mentioned one of the biggest things that all these billionaires mention is being called mom or dad. So as a father, probably so different compared to pre-child, And so I can imagine that not only for you, and it just shows growth, it shows development. The older we get, a lot of the outward stuff just starts to kind of melt away if you are continuing a journey of self-reflection, continue to build your emotional intelligence, self-awareness, then you start seeing that. Otherwise, there's still obviously going to be a lot of type A people who just care so much about outside climbing the ladder, the cost of anything. And so those are the ones that oftentimes I think I'm sure you've interacted with many, like I said, just being in the startup space for a while, so many different personalities. I can just imagine how many of those you've interacted with and how much you've been like, you know what, these are great qualities. And these are not so great qualities, and I'm going to learn from them.
Mhm.
But I can again imagine it's been a lot for you. Based off of kind of your experience where you're at today and your own personal journey of development as a startup founder, what lesson do you think has taken you the longest to unlearn so far?
Hmm. See, I just hate to sound like a broken record,
Mhm.
um, because at this point it's not really tactical business stuff, right? Like, sure, I can have an opinion on something that I've seen or heard or experienced myself tactically from a strategy perspective. But one thing that I've learned is that even over the years, even the way that someone was able to grow a company or become successful, you'll find an example of someone who did it as well, and it was the exact opposite, the polar opposite of that. So I tend to not really have huge opinions on the tactical stuff, and it just always circles back to what this conversation or podcast is
Mhm.
kind of honed on. It's that idea that I mentioned earlier. It's like being able to not be reactive, need make emotional decisions, to continue to work on that, because ultimately the journey, there is no destination. There's just not. I mean, there are like nice things, right? You have a bigger house if you cash out, or you can buy these toys or whatever. But my observation is that from a lot of different um, sources, close friends, my experience too with certain things, is that there is no destination. It always continues. And so you have to enjoy the journey. And so, to your question, like, that's one of the biggest challenges, is continuing to enjoy the journey and not get like tied up
Mhm.
or wrapped up on like emotional rabbit holes, or what if this or what if that, or oh, look at those people, they're doing it, oh, they're crushing it, oh, why didn't I make that, this much money, all these sorts of things.
Mhm.
Keeping my internal dialogue in check.
Mhm.
I know that's not that useful, I think, from maybe a tactical perspective, but I would argue that if you're able to enjoy the journey, then you're going to be better suited to make decisions, and you're not going to necessarily make decisions from a position of fear, whether you're aware that fear is underneath
Mhm.
or an influencing factor or not is another question. There's some cases where it's very obvious that you're in a fearful state. Stuff like founders shut down companies all the time,
Yep.
right? And I'm not saying, like, look, I don't know, right? I don't know the distribution between like founders that shouldn't have shut down the companies, and because they were so scared because of the very obvious real things that happen all the time and situations that they're in, versus like they just burned out emotionally and gave up, and maybe should have continued. But that's a good example of, like, I would argue that there's a lot of founders out there that could have kept going, and didn't, because fear was an influencing factor, ultimately allowing them to rationalize that. And I say that not based on opinion, like, I've done it. I would say not all. There's certainly ventures that I put together in the past that it was the right thing to do to not pursue it anymore. Certainly learned a lot. So, failures, you mentioned failures earlier. What we call failures are actually not really failures. They're learning experiences, as cliche as that is, but it is absolutely 1,000% true. We call them failures because that's, just our language that we use to describe that experience. But that's what I would say.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. So my question to you now, and you mentioned that a lot of the stuff that you've shared, also mindset, it's kind of higher level for the people who are struggling, other founders, um, and just people who are trying to find more balance. Again, you've had a lot of experience.
Mhm.
You're taking a lot of your experiences and great way to correct that, not failures, but lessons and life experiences that have kind of molded you to where you are today. What would you say then are the tactical things that you regularly do to kind of keep yourself in check? Um,
Yeah.
with all the roles that you're playing, right? As a father, as a husband, as a founder of a company, as a student, right, of this life, and whether
Yeah.
philosophy. What are the tactical things that you're doing regularly to just, like I say, continue to grow, continue to build your own emotional intelligence and your own self-awareness, and bring in your best self to all those around you?
Yeah. So I will provide some tactical stuff and then some other stuff that is maybe more like internal work stuff, like internal inside yourself kind of stuff that helps, as I mentioned, I believe helps the business overall. Tactical stuff, and let's just say B2B software company, you should be speaking to as many users or customers
Mhm.
as possible forever. Period. Like if you don't understand, I'm not suggesting that you should be the salesperson forever, but you should be the first salesperson, and that should last for quite a while. And you should always be involved in some way or another in what's happening on the front lines from a sales perspective.
Mhm.
Even if you're not a founder that's inclined uh, to participate, or you're not wired that way, if you're gonna start a company, you got to. These ideas, or these days around like these days of like being just coding in the back. I just don't know. Like I think there's a place where you could be building stuff if you're a technical founder, but this means that you gotta like build that muscle to be customer facing. So that's one tactical thing. Always be doing what we call customer development, right? Like
Mhm.
that's the fancy term that we've been using the last couple of years. Um, the other thing is setting from day one with your co-founders
Mhm.
the foundation of what the culture for the organization is going to be, and the type of organization that you're going to want to build, and the possibilities that will stem from that. For example, it may be that you just want to be a 3-person company. You don't want to do a venture back thing, and you want to work 3 hours a day for whatever 4 days a week or something like that. And that's what you're trying to do. Be very intentional, I think, about that, and about the possibilities. Like maybe that's, you and your partners are now aligned around that, and that might change, right? But you know being able to speak to, well, if it did change, what would it have to look like, right? Leaving the door open for those possibilities, but aligning on what that should look like, certainly from day one. It may be that you want to build a big company, public company with 10,000 employees or whatever, right? And you want to do this for 30 years. Okay, great. But setting out with that intention and aligned um, with your partners early on is going to be huge. And then that sets the tone for especially the second thing, right? If you're going to build a big ass company like that, you want to start to think about what are those like, this is not just building product and getting customers. Like now I got like another customer, which is called my employees, that I would argue is equally or even more important than customers
Yeah.
externally, because if your employees are unhappy, not motivated, inspired, even if you do get customers, it ain't gonna last, right? So, I know that some would argue against the idea that maybe employees are um, equal or even higher priority. I hate to like try to quantify the importance between customers and employees, but let's just say that like at a minimum, they are equally as important, right? This is not a, hey, customers are the only thing, revenue is the only thing that matters. That's very short-sighted. Um, so, those are some tactical stuff. I know, again, not rocket science, but it's interesting because you have to think as a salesperson to start to talk to as many users as possible. So you're the salesperson, you're the market researcher slash product marketer, you're the founder, you're doing all these sort of things. It's one of the challenges of being a founder. And then of course the other stuff that I mentioned around culture and intention of the type of business. Now, some other tactical stuff about like some of this cultivating some of the stuff that we talked about here. Constantly be reading. You don't, I guess the books are out of the view here, but constantly reading on these topics of self-awareness, leadership,
Mhm.
um, esoteric topics, if that's what you enjoy, right? Like, if none of this resonates, that's cool. Like, I'm just speaking from my journey, right? But I do believe that this is a critical piece of being a great leader. It may not be yoga and meditation and Tai Chi or, these maybe more traditionally Eastern spiritual or philosophical practices. You have Stoicism, which is great, right? That even though it's rooted in a lot of these like ancient Eastern philosophies, and you see the overlap um, all the time, it's still kind of like Western Greek philosophy, right? Kind of stuff. Um, so there's something out there that will be able to provide the wisdom around how to live a as peaceful and happy, joyful, life, right? Like whatever, however you want to call it, meditation. It could be running. I did a documentary series on startup CEOs and founders years ago, and so I went around Silicon Valley and some other areas interviewing these CEOs, and 100% of the CEOs, and I interviewed like leaders at VC firms too, et cetera. They all had a practice of some sort of way of like connecting with their bodies and
Mhm.
something that would help them release energy, stress, whatever you want to call it. And whether it was running or a lot were doing meditation, some of the other things that I mentioned to you. So tactically, that's one thing that I would also say, find some sort of practice outside of the work and even outside of the family, right? Because there's these practices like the running, like the yoga, like the whatever, that will then help you as a leader to be more centered and grounded when dealing with all the things that we have to do as leaders, as entrepreneurs, but also with our families and our communities. Like we put ourselves in a better state of being. We're just going to be better in general, and all of that stuff's going to be in more of a flow state, right? So that's what I would say. Dig in, check it out. There's some flavor of this stuff that will resonate with you.
Yeah, I love that, especially the thing you just mentioned at the end. So that sounds a very cool your little docu-series, the founders that you interviewed. And it just from another podcast that I listened to, Diary of a CEO. Um, he had a guest. I don't remember her name. Something Swart. She's a neurosurgeon. She's got a book called The Source. But one of the things that she mentioned, for example, which I was like, man, that's you just don't think of that, like which you just touched on. So I'll just quickly describe it. This idea of, if you're a leader, if you're a founder, your the value that you're bringing, it's housed in here. People are paying you for your brain. for kind of your experiences, your way of thinking. And so I think a lot of people who are trying to move up the ladder, or they're just trying to continue to they push themselves to their limit. The problem that a lot of these people, they end up getting burnt out. And so if people are paying you, if your experience or your life is rewarded because of your brain, and you're not creating a conducive environment, aka taking care of your body, number one, that's going to be very quickly, you're going to reach burnout. You're not going to have any creative energy. You're just going to struggle to just function in all other areas of life. So a lot of type A personalities and people who are very focused on just crushing it all the time, you'll see, they'll neglect sleep. And sleep is one of the most important. Hydration, exercise. So if you mentioned that 100% of the people that you had interviewed were doing something that just grounded them, whether it's meditation, running, just getting you back out of the outside world and back and looking inward, and then continuing to just cultivate and nurture that. That's, what differentiates successful people from people who are not. So I love that. When she shared that, I was at the gym and I was like, thank God I'm here right now. Because again, for a while, I used to think I need to keep doing more. And then you realize that the less you sleep, the less, and I would, especially after COVID happened, I remember I think a lot of people, they just stopped moving. And so you're just constantly sitting there staring at a screen. And then especially creative people, you wonder, why do I feel like I'm lacking energy? I'm lacking motivation. It's because of that, because you're forced to just sit in one spot and you're not taking care of the vehicle that's helping you get to where you need to be in all areas of your life. So I love that you mentioned that. Something totally that I think everyone should keep in mind.
Absolutely. It's not just hitting the hammer
Mm-hmm.
on the nail, right? It's giving yourself the space. People who are stressed or burned out or scared
Yeah.
are not creative. It's like there's an analogy here that's going to be interesting, or a correlation. People who are stressed, scared, all that are not loving.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a fight or flight state. You're not, that doesn't equal creativity. That doesn't equal innovation, you know. So it's actually in your organization's best interest to be able to promote these things. And as leaders out there, go to market, founders,
Yeah.
boards, etc., like we should understand
Mm-hmm.
the longer term benefits to your commercial operation of implementing these principles.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Totally. Like you're in survival mode. You are not creative when you're in survival mode. I love
Yeah.
that. This has been a great conversation so far. I have got I know we're running out of time here, but I've got rapid fire, and
Sure.
I'm definitely, there's a bunch of questions, standard questions I've asked, probably questions you've never heard before. But I'm just gonna, if you're ready for it, the idea is you got to be quick, but
All
nobody's.
right, let's rock and roll. Let's do it.
All right. Um, Coffee or tea to fuel your workday?
Sorry, could you say it again?
Coffee or tea to fuel your
T.
workday? Tea. All right. I felt like you would say tea. Now after talking to you, I'm like, this guy, he's definitely a tea guy. What's your favorite tea?
I love chamomile tea and
Mm.
ashwagandha,
Oh
stuff that's
yeah.
like more
Yeah.
soothing and relaxing.
Yep. 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 I recently was exposed to ashwagandha a couple of years ago when I was actually dealing with some anxiety.
Hmm.
And man, it just really calms you down.
Yeah, it's
And I
awesome.
started cutting out coffee for that. Describe your work style in one word.
Autonomous.
I like that. What is your most strongly held professional belief?
That it's important to be heart centered and lead with that intention.
Hmm. I love that. What made you smile today?
My dog Arthur,
What kind of dog is that?
he's a miniature long-haired dachshund,
Oh, I'm going to Google that. Miniature long-haired dachshund. And how old is he?
a little over 3.
Oh, cute. Adorable. I love that. You just have one dog?
Yeah. A dog and a cat.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. What made you, oh, I just asked that one. What's your spirit fruit? Not your spirit animal, your spirit fruit.
My spirit fruit, papaya,
Why?
because it's good for your stomach, settling your stomach.
Hmm.
And so, especially when you're just hold a lot of emotion in that sacral area,
Yep, yep.
um, it's good.
I should pick up some. I do not regularly consume. Maybe I've had it once by accident, but I'm going to pick up some papaya. Are you
Put a little
salty
honey
or
on it.
with honey on it?
Yeah, put a little honey
Oh,
on it.
that sounds very nice. Are you salty or sweet?
Salty.
What was your last impulse buy?
Acupuncture. I don't buy anything, so
Yeah,
yeah.
I have not also acupuncture, something I have to add to my list of things I've never done. What title would you give this chapter of your life?
Growth.
I love that. What is one random thing you cannot live without?
My wife.
It's very, very good answer. And then who inspires you? Who do you think we should invite onto the show?
Wow, there's a lot. There are a lot of people. My buddy Joe Caprio. There's so many people actually.
Mhm.
It depends on what topic you want to get into from a go to market and
Yeah.
perspective and just building companies and all that. My buddy Joe Caprio, he's a partner at Glasswing Ventures, a venture capital firm uh, in Boston, and yeah, I got a lot of love for the guy. But also Gaetano Denari, he's a growth, also go to market growth genius, specifically really awesome at SEO. He's like known as like the SEO guru in B2B, also based here in Miami. Former sales hacker, VP of marketing, was VP at Nextiva, a lot of stuff. Built the early day marketing at Pipedrive, the CRM. So yeah, a lot of folks. There is a guy, if you want to dig into emotional intelligence, uh, his name is Phil Johnson, and he's on LinkedIn. You can find him there, and he's got like a whole emotional intelligence leadership management program that he's put together. I think he's based in Canada. He's really great
Very nice. Fellow
as well.
Canadian. I will definitely check him out. I'm
Yeah,
in Canada,
nice.
Vancouver. Wonderful. Yeah, I'm gonna email you. I'm gonna get some names, but I love that.
Okay.
You had shared a bunch already when we were talking. People that sound very interesting. Well, again, this was an absolutely amazing episode. I'll always love, like, and the founder stories are very interesting because you end up just, like I said, marketing, like this stuff is important, but at the end of the day, we're people doing jobs. And so just understanding your state of mind and how you're approaching kind of leadership, your company, how you're taking care of yourself. I think all the stuff that we touched on today is so important. So I absolutely had a blast today. And I think our viewers will too, our listeners. Are you available anywhere else besides LinkedIn? Is that the primary channel? And how can people find you? How can they connect with
Yeah. LinkedIn, Startup George, but also Startup George, or it's spelled
you?
JORG, as we discussed at the top of the show. Um, Also LinkedIn, sorry, not LinkedIn, Twitter rather, or whatever, X now,
X.
I should say. So yeah, LinkedIn, X/Twitter. My Instagram is mostly like private,
Mhm.
family, friends kind of thing, and Facebook I haven't really spent a lot of time on. I
Same.
know I should get into TikTok, but I just I haven't been able to. Snap, I'm on those things too, but I haven't used Snap in, I don't know, 5 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, LinkedIn
LinkedIn and
and
X.
Twitter,
LinkedIn and
yeah.
X. Okay. Yeah. Same here. And we'll share it out when this episode goes live. But thank you again for
Okay,
joining us.
cool. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Of course. And for our listeners, if you like this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it out with the world. Until next time, keep experimenting, growing, and stay inspired. Thanks, y'all.
If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to Growth Marketing Camp wherever you enjoy your podcasts.